And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Two Guys in a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And over there is William Bell from Memphis, Tennessee, the founder of All Things Fulfilled. William, great to see you again.
Good to be here as always.
And ladies and gentlemen, you'll notice how drably I am dressed tonight. uh,
Isn't he sharp? That's a nice looking shirt he's wearing.
pat yourself on the back there, William. Pat yourself on the back. Uh, William has worn some absolutely beautiful, beautiful shirts, and people have commented on it. And lots of folks have said, "Boy, Don, why don't you get some shirts like that yourself?" Well, I don't have access to shirts like that. William's shirts came from Africa, uh, and he has a tailor over there, no less. Now, don't get money in your eyes because William's shirts that he had personally tailored cost him what, $3 a piece, William?
Well, they're not that much. They're not, I mean, they don't cost much. I won't say $3, but they're not very expensive. I'll put it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah. So
They're a
anyway,
lot cheaper than what I could buy them in the United
oh
States.
no,
Let's say
no
it that way.
question whatsoever. So anyway, before William left for his most recent trip, I told him, I said, "Hey man, I want a couple of really, really pretty shirts." I said, "I'll leave the design up to you and what have you." And so after a little bit of drama at the UPS store, uh, I went and picked them up today, and this is one of them. And I absolutely love it. Boy, it's really super nice material. I mean, one of my very favorite American-made shirts is Ariat, and they have material like this. And so, so many of the shirts are super, super thin. You, I don't know, they just don't seem to feel good. They don't fit good and
Mhm.
what have you. So, I wind up spending a lot of money for Ariats is what I do. Of course, I don't buy very many of them either. But these two shirts are absolutely beautiful, and I really, really appreciate it, and what have you. Uh, and Jan was like, "Are you really going to wear that on air?"
Why not?
That's what I said. I said, "Well, why shouldn't I?" I said, "That thing is beautiful." And she said, "But yeah, that's not really you." Oh my goodness gracious. I must confess, I've always been a pretty conservative dresser, no question about it. Never been real flamboyant. And so I'm stepping out. That's what I'm doing. I'm
All right.
stepping out.
Well, it looks very good on you, and I'm really glad it fits. That was the
Oh
most
yeah, I
important
mean
thing.
it fits really well. I mean, I was concerned obviously because my wife took the measurements, and as she was saying the whole time she was doing it, she said, "I've never taken measurements, for something like this." I said, "Well, just go get one of my shirts, measure it out, and then compare, measure it, uh, measure it out, and that's what we'll send." And it worked out just really well.
Yeah, but see, I didn't get a chance to get to my tailor for that shirt because I was in Burkina Faso. I picked that up in Togo, which is sort of the transit
Oh, okay.
country to
Okay.
get there. So I didn't get to Ghana at all, and
Okay.
so that one came off the rack. But I mean, it was beautiful, and I looked at it and I said, "This is about done size." And I said, "I think this is going to work, and I'm hoping it's going to work." And man, looking at it, I have no regrets in terms of
Yeah,
picking the size.
no. It is. I haven't tried the other one on, but if they're both the same size
Yes.
and everything, it should fit just exactly fine. I'm glad there was a long sleeve and a short sleeve, both. So now that it remains to be seen what William wears next week in competition.
See, look, he said something about my shirt tonight. He said, "Look at you dressed all plain." I said, "I wanted you to have the entire spotlight. I didn't want to do anything to detract from your glory tonight with that shirt. So I'm good."
All right. Oh, that's funny. That's really funny. All right. Well, folks, thank you again for joining us here on Two Guys in a Bible. We will talk Bible tonight. Pardon me. Uh, William, let me do my little puffer here.
Sure, sure. But it was it was great, picking it out, and I'm really thankful that I was able to find one. And but we always find good stuff when we go through Togo.
Yeah, yeah. All
As a
right.
matter of, go ahead, go ahead.
Go. Yeah.
We're done.
Anyway,
We're done with the shirts.
yeah. We've been discussing the importance, the significance of the Abrahamic covenant, the identity of that Abrahamic covenant blessing, that is the new heaven, the new earth, the resurrection. We've been talking about the fact that Galatians chapter 3 and 4 especially, and it's interesting to me that just today, just before coming on air, I was looking at some of the comments under my video for today, and pardon me, I had made the comment that according according to most scholars, there is widespread agreement that the Abrahamic covenant would be fulfilled at the end of the Mosaic law. Well, this one individual, I don't really honestly don't know if they are if they are a man or a woman. But they posted, well, Don said the majority of scholars say that the Abrahamic covenant would be fulfilled at the end of the Mosaic law. And they said, well, I got on AI today and I asked it, is it true that the majority of scholars believe this? And it said, no, that's not true. Well, I had asked the same question and I got the opposite answer. Look, AI, and I use primarily Grok or Chat GPT or Perplexity. I don't use Gemini except once in a great while. I haven't even used the X AI yet. Don't know anything about it. Got to get familiarized with it. But anyway, if you do not ask a question in a right way, if you ask a biased or slanted question, you can get any kind of answer that you want to. I mean, that's the problem with AI. And so personally, when I go to do a search and an inquiry, I said, I want an unbiased, unprejudiced, impartial, fair answer to the following question. I want just the facts. And I have found that that's a really good way to get good answers. But boy, if you slant it either way, it's going to go right along with you.
Yeah.
It'll dance with you. And that's not the way to do research. Now, this individual said they asked for a fair answer. I'm not convinced they did, to be honest about it. But the bottom line is, in the research that I've been doing, and I've got two brand new commentaries on Jeremiah that I got in just today, another one yesterday, and I've got a whole list of commentaries over there. Every single one of them that goes into detail. For instance, on Jeremiah chapter 3, when it talks about the time is going to come in which men would no longer remember the Ark of the Covenant, and it would no longer be built, but it would be the time of the restoration of Israel and the time of the glorification of Zion. Every one of them. This is the ultimate fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant. So this individual didn't give any examples of scholars who disagreed with that. They just said, no, that's false. But men like G.K. Beale, men like N.T. Wright, and these two that I just got in today, let me see, what are they? Oh, yeah. Andrew Blackwood Jr., commentary on Jeremiah, and a commentary on Jeremiah, Walter Brueggemann. Now, but Walter Brueggemann is recognized as a highly, highly respected Old Testament scholar, very, very well recognized. And both of these men are unequivocal in stating that the Abrahamic covenant promise would come at the end of the law of Moses. So I have to keep in mind that there are some people, the only time they ever pop up on YouTube or Facebook is try to find fault. I mean, that's all in the world they're there for. They're not there to, quote, learn. They're there to find fault. They're there to promote their own personal agenda. So I'm going to stick with the research I've done. with the scholars that I have read, and most importantly, with what the Bible says. That's the real issue here. So, William, last week we went through Galatians chapter 4, 22 and following, and Paul's very, very famous allegory. Why don't you give us a really, really brief summarization of what we looked at last week and what we saw from Galatians chapter 4 in Paul's allegory?
All right. Well, we talked about the two sons, and of course they represented the two covenants, the two mountains, one according to the flesh and the other according to the spirit, with Hagar and Sarah, and then the two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael was persecuting Isaac, and as a result of that, was cast out and not allowed to inherit with Isaac. They were the ones who were the true heirs as a result of their faith in the promise, and that's the application of the allegory in terms of the time of the end.
We closed out our program last week by pointing out that what Paul says in Galatians 4 is also taught in two other New Testament books, the book of Hebrews and the book of Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
And in Hebrews, we likewise find, now some of the constituent elements may be a little bit more tacit. They may not be as explicit as explicitly stated, but the concepts are there. So what do we find in the book of Hebrews? We find the fact of a contrast between Moses and Jesus. Moses was a servant in a house. Christ was a son over his own house. Well, that's a contrast between the law of Moses and Christ, is it not, William?
Oh, yes.
Is that not what Galatians chapter 4 is all about?
That's the same theme.
Same identical theme. So throughout the book of Hebrews, we have this unfolding of the contrast between the old covenant law of Moses and Christ, and sandwiched in, embedded in those contrasts, we find the Abrahamic promise, the Abrahamic covenant found in Hebrews chapter 6. And last week we took note of just a few things from Hebrews chapter 6. We'll go back over there and we'll take a fresh look at some of the things that we saw, because, boy, this is really, really important. You know, sometimes, William, I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I feel like Hebrews chapter 6 is the pivot point of Hebrews. And then other times I think Hebrews chapter 9 is the pivot point. I kind of vacillate between those. But nonetheless, what does Hebrews chapter 6 talk about? Starting with verse 13, when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely, blessing I will bless you, multiplying I will multiply you. And so after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise. Well, like we talked last week, the promise that Abraham inherited, the one that he actually did receive, was the physical multiplication of his physical seed and the inheritance of the physical land. That's kind of where we had wound up, correct?
That's right.
Okay. For men indeed swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is for them an end of all controversy. Thus God, determining to show more abundantly to the heirs of the promise. Now, what promise is he talking about now, William?
The heirs of the promise here would be the promise that he made concerning Jesus Christ coming and the inheritance that they would receive through Christ.
All right. So he is talking about the expansive Abrahamic promise. I think it's very, very important for us to understand, folks. The Abrahamic promise was two-tiered, two levels, if you please. There was the physical, there was the spiritual. The physical was, I'm going to give you all of the land that you can see. I'm going to multiply you. I'm going to make many nations from you. That's the physical aspect. Okay. And then we find you and your seed, singular, will all the nations of the earth be blessed. And they would be blessed by receiving righteousness. They would be blessed because Abraham was in fact promised that he would inherit the world, cosmos. So understanding that the Abrahamic promise was two-tiered is so critically important because, William, you know, our dispensational friends say, oh, look, Abraham never received the promise. The children of Israel never received even the land promise. So before we proceed, what would be your response to that?
Uh, First of all, it would demonstrate that God lied concerning it. You've got the text in Joshua chapter 23 and 24 that demonstrate that they received the land and God fulfilled all his word concerning those things. And at the time, even that Hebrews was written, they're in the land. So that just doesn't wash concerning that. They in fact did receive that promise um, through the descendants of Abraham, of course, which is how Abraham inherited, but his descendants certainly inherited the land. That's the fulfillment from the Exodus all the way into Joshua chapter 5.
Yeah, not only that, and pardon me, in Deuteronomy chapter 34, we are specifically told that the promise of the land was given that Abraham's descendants would receive that promise.
Hmm.
And so it wasn't that Abraham personally, individually, was going to inherit all of that land. No, Deuteronomy 34, 2 and 3 is that his descendants would inherit that land and that he would receive it through them. Uh, I guess we could say that's a representative.
Yes, that's I would think that that's what Stephen has reference to in Acts chapter 7 when he talks about God giving him the land, but not so much as much as to set his foot on. So individually, Abraham did not receive it. He received it through his descendants. That's kind of like the tithes being paid through Levi, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a concept that far too few people really honestly are familiar with in our modern American society. They think, well, he promised Abraham. Abraham never inherited it personally, therefore the promise failed or it waits future fulfillment. No, the idea of corporate identity and representative identity is very, very strong in the New Testament, well, throughout the Bible, as a matter of fact, in which a person uh, represented another person.
Hmm.
And if this individual received what this individual was promised, then this individual received it because it's their lineage, it's their identity. And when I was in Australia this year, Al Prashon gave a marvelous lesson on the word shaliach, the Hebrew word shaliach. And that is that anyone who was a shaliach was the was in fact the key representative of someone else. And that if this representative, if this representative shaliach, number one, he did the work of the master, he represented the master in all ways and means. And if he received what the master was due, then the master was receiving it. There was no diminution, of the promise
Hmm.
because he is the shaliach. And I've done a terrible job of explaining that. Al Prashon did. It was one of the best word study lessons that I've heard in a long, long time. I've been intending to contact Al and say, send me a copy, an audio copy, audio visual copy of your lesson on the Shaliach so that I can just really, really absorb every single point that you were making because I was sitting there going, oh, wow, this is beautiful, beautiful stuff. It really was. So Abraham received the land through his descendants. And in doing so, when the descendants received the land, the promise to Abraham was viewed as fulfilled. And William, I think I've pointed this out in previous programs. I know I have on other people's programs. It's really fascinating to me. You've already mentioned Joshua chapter 24 or 21, 43 to 45, in which at the period of conquest, it was said that Israel had received all the land. Not one word of God's promises failed. Again, that's the period of conquest. You jump forward to the period of the United Kingdom, and in 2 Kings chapter 4, 20 and 21, it says Solomon reigned over all of the land, and it gives all of the territory, all of the borders listed in Genesis 15.
Correct.
16 and following. So here you have, at the period of the time of the conquest, Israel possessed the land. During the period of the United Kingdom, Israel possessed all of the land. As a matter of fact, some commentators, I've got some names in my data file, tell us that the actual borders given in 2 Kings chapter 4 are greater than the borders listed in Genesis 15. So God not only kept his promise, he went beyond that. Third, after the divided kingdom, after the return from captivity in the Babylonian kingdom, Nehemiah chapter 9, 13 and following, Nehemiah rehearsed the Abrahamic promise, or the promise that was given to Abraham, in which God said, I'm going to give you the land of the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Cadmonites. I don't even remember all the ites that are listed there. But Nehemiah said, and you have fulfilled your word because you are faithful. Now, if anybody would have had a reason or a basis to say, Lord, you made a promise to us about the land, and we're waiting for you to finally get around to fulfilling this. But here's Nehemiah rehearsing Israel's history and the promises, saying, Lord, you have fulfilled all of your word. That's pretty powerful stuff to me.
Yes, it is. I mean, it's telling you in several places in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses in terms of, the documentation in the scriptures that it was fulfilled, that he had given them the land.
And there are other passages. I mean, we could look at, pardon me, we can look at Jeremiah 32. We could look at Deuteronomy 10. We could look at Numbers. I mean, there's a ton of verses that just explicitly say God gave the land. So it's really, honestly, it's not even debatable whether or not God gave Israel the land. The only question, therefore, comes back to the spiritual aspect of the land. And William, this is where we are confronted with the problem of futurism, because Abraham was promised the new heaven, the new earth, and resurrection. And what do the 3 futurist eschatologies say about that?
Well, they view the new heavens and new earth as heaven, that we end up in, some cases where we get 3 worlds, so to speak. And, you get the old covenant world that ends at the cross. And then you get, the present age, which, it's confusing. They have problems with trying to figure out the last days within that. But then we have, a future age after this one, is dissolved and destroyed. So that's, one of the views that people have regarding it as far as the futurist is concerned. They do not see the covenantal overlap and the time of the end for the old covenant age, if you please, that transitions into the new, and the fact that one has already broken into reality. And
it's
that
real, yeah.
was the case even in the New Testament. But
yeah, and I think what you're pointing out here is extremely, extremely important. And I've got all sorts of books laying on my desk in which scholar after scholar attests to the fact that the New Testament writers saw themselves living in that interim period between the old and the new, and the new had broken into the old. and the old was slowly passing away, and so the New Testament writers, Romans chapter 13, 11 and following, the night is far spent, the day has drawn near. First John chapter 2, verse 15 and following. Here John says, the night is passing away, and even now the true light is shining. So they believe themselves to be living in a transitional period of time. And yet today, they're even preterists. I've been involved in discussions lately with preterists who absolutely deny a transitional state. And they say, by the way, just before coming on the air tonight, I was having a bit of a conversation with a preterist, and he said, the law completely passed away at the cross. The law became obsolete at the cross. And you're going, wait a minute. Until heaven and earth passes, not one jot or one tittle shall pass from the law until it's all fulfilled. It wasn't all fulfilled at the cross. Sometimes you feel like going, how many times does Jesus have to repeat this before people start believing it?
I think of Luke 24 in a case like that, when he says, these are the words that I spoke with you while I was still with you. And he says he opened their understanding that they might understand or comprehend the scriptures. And he said it was necessary that Christ should suffer. Well, that's what you get at the cross, the suffering of Christ, his death. But then you have these coordinating conjunctions that say, and that he should rise from the dead the third day. And it doesn't stop there. And that repentance and remission of sins should be preached in his name among all the nations, beginning at Jerusalem. And we know that you did not have the gospel going to all the nations. It went to all the nations in terms of the Jews who were scattered and had come on Pentecost. But in terms of going, to the nations, starting with Cornelius and even somewhat with the Samaritans in chapter 8, that had not occurred. And yet that was a part of the gospel mission. All of that was a part of what Jesus had talked to them about in saying this would be the time for the fulfillment of the old covenant.
Absolutely. And that that narrative of what Jesus was saying in Luke chapter 20, 24, 44 and following is played out in Acts chapter 1, when Jesus said to his apostles, you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. And he wasn't saying you'll just do that representatively because they weren't going anywhere on, on the day of Pentecost, but you're going to be my witnesses in these regions. You're going to go to these regions and to bear witness of him. And there's something else, William. And last week I was in a conversation with an individual who, pardon me, I would almost use the word harassed because they just follow me almost everywhere. And this particular individual said the law passed away at the cross. As a matter of fact, he went so far as to say all three of Israel's final three feast days were fulfilled at Calvary.
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of what I said the very first time I read that comment. I go, what? The final three feast days, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, all of those supposedly fulfilled at the cross, and yet the same individual went ahead to say, in talking about Sukkot, it was fulfilled at the cross, although some elements were not fulfilled until AD 66 when there was a rapture. So this same individual was saying all three of the final feasts were fulfilled at the cross. Oh, wait, they weren't after all. I mean, that's exactly what he was saying. But think about this. In order for anyone, not just this individual, but just like the individuals that I was reading in their comments on my YouTube today, who said the law passed away at the cross, and other people were chiming in and saying, oh, you're exactly right. I go, I'm sorry. That conflates let's just think about it this. William, what was the very first feast day?
That was Passover.
Passover. Followed by the Feast of Unleavened Bread, followed by the Feast of Weeks, followed by the Feast of First Fruits. Okay? Then came Rosh Hashanah, Feast of Trumpets.
Mm-hmm.
Then came Yom Kippur, Feast of Atonement, or the Day of Atonement. Then came again Sukkot, Feast of Harvest, Feast of Ingathering. So almost every one of these individuals who tell us and who argue, I remember in my debate with Kurt Simmons, he argued that the last three feast days were fulfilled at the cross. And I pointed out in my debate with him, of course, that debate is in written form, it's available on my website, by saying that the last three feast days were fulfilled at the cross. What they're saying is the last feast day, Sukkot, which was the Feast of Harvest, was fulfilled before the Feast of First Fruits was ever fulfilled. You had the harvest before you ever had the first fruit. Now you want to talk about anachronism?
Yeah, was he saying that was fulfilled at the cross or at Pentecost? I'm just curious. Make sure I heard you correctly.
He said all the last three feast days were fulfilled at Calvary.
If that's the case, they're fulfilled. The harvest is fulfilled before you even do the sowing.
That's what I'm saying. It's before the sowing, it's before the first fruit.
Yeah.
I mean, it becomes such an anachronistic mishmash, which is a word that I used in responding to him. Mm-hmm. Pardon me. And I've also posed this question. If this gets into the question of when was the atonement completed? Now, Paul has a lot to say about forgiveness and redemption and righteousness in the book of Galatians and Hebrews, obviously. So if Yom Kippur was completed, fulfilled at the cross, then William, answer a question. Is it not a legitimate question to ask, okay, Passover was the first feast, and it was the first month of their year. Yom Kippur was in the 7th month. Passover began the year. Sukkot was at the ending of the year. Mm-hmm. They called it the turning of the year. So what this individual and these individuals are doing is they are saying the very the sixth feast day is actually fulfilled at the time of the first. So my question is, and my question to you, William, is this a legitimate question to ask? Why would there be a need for a sixth feast if what was being to be accomplished on the sixth feast was actually accomplished at the time of the first?
Well, there wouldn't be, as far as I can see. If it's already done, there's no need to have a sixth feast. It would have already been fulfilled.
And back to Sukkot, if Sukkot was fulfilled on Calvary, then when does the sowing take place? And what do you have need for a feast of first fruits? Because, I mean, after all, harvest is back here, you know, first. I mean, it's just pure anachronism. I'm sometimes just staggered, you know, and you, as you well know, down through the years, I invented this Latin term, argumentum ad desperatum. And to me, that this is the very epitome of that kind of argumentation. And to carry this forward just a little bit more, William, what did the Feast of Trumpets symbolize, foreshadow, and represent?
Well, several things. One was the marriage, you know, the wedding, the judgment, the coronation of the king. Let's see, I can't think of all of them, but, you know, there were several things that were involved there.
It's the call to assembly. It's the call to war.
Yes.
You know, and it symbolized the day of judgment.
Yes.
You read, I mean, anytime you read the Jewish literature and the scholarly literature, there's just universal agreement on this. So if you're going to say that the last three feast days were fulfilled at Calvary, wouldn't that mean that the judgment took place at the cross?
Exactly.
I wonder why then the New Testament writers over and over and over speak of the coming judgment at the time of the judgment, or excuse me, time of the trumpet, sounding of the trumpet.
Hmm.
Matthew 24, verse 30, 1 Thessalonians 4, Revelation chapter 11, 15, and following. In all these texts, you have the judgment at the sounding of the trumpet, but all of these passages are way after the cross. And so, as I said to this gentleman, your narrative, and it's all in support of the AD 66 rapture doctrine. That's what he was trying to get out. And as the direct corollary of that, to condemn me, and you came into the conversation as well at times, that's only fair that you get blamed as well. So
I'll happily take part of that blame.
yeah. So the point of it is, one of the reasons he's doing this is to condemn us for saying that the atonement was not completed until the parousia of Christ, the coming of the high priest out of the most holy place. No, no, no. The atonement was absolutely consummated at the cross. Well, by doing that, one more time, folks, you got to catch the power of this. That puts the sixth feast at the time of the first. That destroys the chronological flow of Israel's feast days. And there's another thing, William, that I have found. There's 2 points I want to make here, and I want to get your comments on it. In Colossians chapter 2, passage you're very, very familiar with, in Colossians chapter 2, 16 and 17, Paul said to those Gentile Christians being pressured to obey the law of Moses, to be circumcised in order to be saved, let no man judge you in respect of new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths, which are present active, a shadow of the good things that are about to come. Now, I've had 2 or 3 different individuals tell me, well, Preston, you're just relying too much on the Greek tenses there. What's your response to that?
I would say that the emphasis ought to be on what the text says. If the text demonstrates
Gee, that's so simple.
Exactly. I mean, why would you want to deviate from what the text actually says? And when it uses the present tense, which says that they are a shadow of things about to come, that's telling you that those events were not in the past, that they were yet to occur, in terms of the fulfillment, and that parallels so many other places in the New Testament, like Hebrews 9, etc. But yeah, you've got to follow the language of the New Testament. And back to the subject of the atonement, that's the same situation. Is they look at one text that may use a past tense verb
or a present tense,
but they will ignore the future tense.
Yes.
And just totally disregard it. And that's what I've seen when, we look at, passages like that. So paying attention to the actual wording that the Holy Spirit used in those passages is critical to coming away with the right and proper understanding.
It's interesting to me that this individual, when I kept bringing up the Greek tenses, he literally scoffed at my appeal. Well, all Preston can do is appeal to a single passage with present tenses in it, which I didn't appeal to just one. I appealed to Hebrews chapter 10, Hebrews chapter 9, what have you. But here's what became really interesting. This same individual, he went to Romans chapter 5, verse 9 and 10, in whom we have received the atonement. And he says, this is a past tense in the Greek. You have to honor the Greek tense. So I asked him, what is your hermeneutic for demanding that we observe the Greek tenses in one text, but we ignore them in another? And you literally scoff at them in another. And he's never answered that question. But he says, well, that's just a flimsy argument. I have said, when is it flimsy to accept the Greek tenses? And when is it right to scoff at the Greek tenses simply because the Greek tenses violate your paradigm? That's the problem right there. Another issue, William, and I've been bringing this up over the last several weeks. Well, I've been using it for years,
Mhm.
but just over the last few weeks, I have brought it up to a couple of different individuals who have insisted that the law of Moses passed away, was nailed to the cross, et cetera, et cetera. And I've gone back to Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus said, until heaven and earth passes, not one jot or one tittle shall pass from the law. And I have asked them, if the law passed away at the cross, then heaven and earth passed away at the cross. Is that correct? Well, most of them didn't want to answer the question. They just simply glossed right over it. To use the terminology, they observed the Passover. And then I have pointed out, here is Jesus saying, until heaven and earth passes, not one jot or one tittle shall pass from the law. And we come to Peter in 2 Peter chapter 3, who is looking for the destruction of heaven and earth. And I have asked the question, is this, number one, when did Peter write this? Was it after the cross? Well, duh. And number two, is this a different heaven and earth from what you demand to be passing away at the cross? Because your position demands that, quote, heaven and earth passed away at the cross. Now, since Peter was still looking for the passing of a heaven and earth, which heaven and earth was he looking to pass away? Similar argument, John in Revelation. At the end of the millennium, John said, I saw heaven and earth pass away, flee away. Iphugein, I think, is the Greek word there, but I forgot. Anyway, but heaven and earth fled away. There's no place found for them. Revelation chapter 21, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, because the first heaven and earth had passed away. So once again, I have asked the question, if according to your paradigm, the law passed away at the cross, then of necessity, heaven and earth passed away at the cross. So here is John writing in the 60s, saying that he was anticipating the imminent passing away of heaven and earth. So once again, my question is, what heaven and earth was John looking to be passing away in a very, very soon context? So, William, is that a valid question? Is that a valid argument?
Yeah, it's valid. And with the many texts in the New Testament, there are several that talk about the passing of heaven and earth.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them speak of it as happening at that very time. For example, in Hebrews 12,
Yeah.
the heavens and earth that are being shaken. So was it done away at the cross, or was it yet being done away at the time that Hebrews was written? And then you got the book of Revelation, which they can't decide, or they won't accept the pre-70 dating of the book of Revelation. So they put that after 70 AD and still see a destruction of heaven and earth, a passing of heaven and earth. And what is interesting to me is the different ways that the scripture speak about the passing of heaven and earth. In one text, Hebrews 1:10, it folds up, like clothing. In Revelation 20 and 11, it flees, and then it burns up in 2 Peter 3, etc., and just passes away, I guess, passively and casually in 1 John chapter 2. So, it's shaken in Hebrews chapter 12. So you've got all these different ways, and if they're not all the same, and the verb tenses referring to them at the time, then it just really makes no sense. And all of this is written after the cross in terms of those passages that we mentioned.
Yeah, I think Jack Scott mentioned on one occasion that according to his accounting, there are 5 different ways that heaven and earth is described as passing away, being destroyed, et cetera, in the New Testament. So which one do we choose?
I've mentioned that too.
Yeah, I think Jack was the very first time
He
I
might
ever
have been
heard
the first one that said it.
that I ever heard say it. And yes, I've heard you say it as well. But that's where you run into these inconsistencies in literalism. You know, well, Earth's going to burn up one day. Well, wait a minute. Hebrews says it's going to grow old like a garment and just simply be put aside. And, according to some people, it's going to be renovated and on and on. So, like I said, the inconsistencies of the futurist views in regard to the passing of the earth, and now the inconsistencies of preterists saying, "Oh, the law passed away at the cross." Then I've got to ask, what heaven and earth passed away, or was Peter anticipating would pass away in his very near future? And what heaven and earth was John looking to pass away in his very near future? I haven't gotten an answer to those questions, William.
Probably won't anytime soon.
Probably won't. And it's real interesting. In January, Mike Sullivan and I will be debating Sam Frost and Jeremiah Nortier. They're going to affirm the end of human history. Okay.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. But boy, I tell you, I've been reading some of Sam Frost's book on why I left full preterism. I had read it before. I've been looking at it a little bit more carefully again and again and again. And every time I read, I have to read 2 or 3 paragraphs just to wrap my head around the word salad that is being used. Well, let's just say it's bad. It's really, really bad. You talk about grasping at straws and leaning on broken straws. That's all I see him doing. And I see Sam in this book of why he left full preterism. I see him seemingly just making stuff up as he goes along and making assertions for which I really haven't been able to find a whole lot of documentation. Just haven't been able to find it. And to give you a for instance, in Matthew chapter 24:21, for then shall be great tribulation, such as never been since the beginning of creation or ever yet shall be. I don't know if you've read Sam Frost on that text or not. He had it on Facebook some time ago.
Yeah, not recently.
No,
if I've read him on it,
well,
it hasn't been any time recently.
I won't impose on you to read it. It's unfathomable. But I'm not a Greek scholar by any stretch of the imagination. And of course, Sam likes to promote and expound and say, well, the Greek says this, and it's this, and it's this, and this, and this. And yet, even though I'm not a Greek scholar, I'm not even as much of a Greek scholar as you are. You know more about it than I do. But I know enough about it so that when I read what Sam is saying, I'm going, that's a bluff. I'm sorry, that doesn't work. And then when I can go to the critical Greek commentators, and I can go to Bible Gateway and look up every single English translation, and not one of them comes within a country mile of agreeing with him. And then, like I said, when you go to the actual Greek scholars, and you don't have a single one of them even coming close to saying what he's saying, then my gut feeling that, yeah, that's a bluff, pretty well vindicated. It's absolutely amazing. But he's got to do that because he says there's always been tribulation. And what Jesus was saying in Matthew 24:21, there's always been tribulation since the beginning of creation, and there will be until the end of human history. Well, you can't find that in the text.
No, you can't.
I mean, like I said, not a Greek scholar. I know enough to know that is absolutely, blatantly an abuse of the Greek text. I can sit here and use my lexicons. I can use my grammars. I can consult with the men who are world-class Greek scholars far beyond anything that Sam purports to be. And they essentially say, well, no, that's silly. Yeah. So anyway, But I think this is a very, very important issue because we have this Abrahamic promise. And in my research, William, once again, let me say it again. In my research, I'm finding that the scholars are agreed to a consensus position that the Abrahamic covenant promises would be fulfilled at the end of the law of Moses. I mean, I can give citation after citation after citation of world-class scholars. And like I said, G.K. Beale, R.T. France, on and on and on it goes, who agree with that and who state that very, very powerfully. And then these same scholars, as I pointed out last week, turn right around and they tell us, well, yes, the Abrahamic covenant was supposed to be fulfilled at the end of the law of Moses. Oh, but wait, we're still waiting for the new heaven and the new earth, and we're still waiting for the resurrection. William, isn't that taking a Jehoiakim penknife and just slashing through the Abrahamic promise and just ripping it all to shreds?
In essence, that's what it's doing. Uh, those cannot be separated in terms of the fulfillment. And the Lord said the harvest is the end of the age, and so He's linking it, in Matthew 13 with the end of the law because that comes at the end of the age. That's
Right.
Matthew 24 as well, and Luke 21. So when you put those together, that's in essence what it's saying.
This gets back to the fact, I think it's called cognitive dissonance, William, in which people they see their paradigm crumbling around them, and so they start grasping at these broken straws, and they literally, you and I've commented on this many, many times in our 40 plus years working together, how they start making up brand spanking new arguments that you can't find anywhere, that nobody has ever made before. And they claim, well, there, prove that wrong. And you're going, what? What are you saying? And and yet you have to try to give some kind of a of a reasoned argument to something you've never heard before that has no
Mhm.
bearing in logic or exegesis or hermeneutic. They're just claiming it to be true, and because they claim it's true, therefore it must be true. And it's really honestly an extremely sad situation. Anyway, back to the book of Hebrews and this this two women, two mountains, two covenants, two sons motif found in Galatians chapter 4. We don't find the two women in the book of Hebrews unless I missed it. Do we find a contrast between two women per se?
No, only by inference,
Right,
I would say,
right,
because if you're talking about the two mountains and the two cities, you're talking about them, but not a specific reference to them.
right. I've tried and tried and tried to try to find some elusive reference, and I've never found it, and I don't want to read anything into it that's not there. But we most assuredly do have the two covenants.
Well,
I
sure.
mean, that is just that permeates the
Hmm.
book of Hebrews. If the first covenant had been faultless, he would have found there would have been no place sought for the second, Hebrews chapter 8. And that that second covenant, that promised covenant, was based upon better promises than the first covenant, that is the covenant of Moses. So we'll absolutely, just like Galatians chapter 4, we have this contrast between two covenants. Then in Hebrews chapter 12, we have a contrast between two mountains. Aren't these the two same mountains as Galatians 4?
Yes, and in the text in Galatians 4, if it's saying, these are the two covenants were the two women. This
Yeah.
Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and Sarah answered to the Jerusalem that was above. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
There's the elusive reference, if you please,
yes.
to the two women.
Hmm.
But back to the two mountains. What are those two mountains?
Mount Sinai and Zion.
And here in Hebrews chapter 12, you have not come to the mountain that burned with fire and smoke and thunder and blah, 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 And if so much as an animal touched that mountain, it was to be thrust through with a spear. What mountain was that? Yeah, Sinai. That's Galatians chapter 4. But you have come to the heavenly Jerusalem. And Paul said in Galatians 4, the Jerusalem that is above is the mother of us all. So we've got the same identical contrast going on in Galatians and Hebrews. This is one of the reasons, to me, either Paul wrote Hebrews and was simply reiterating what he had said in Galatians, or the writer of Hebrews, whoever that might be, already knew of Paul's allegory and was building on it. One of those two. Don't know which, not going to argue about it. But the point of fact is, it's the identical motifs,
Mhm.
the identical elements and tenets at work. And it's a contrast between the old covenant law of Moses and the new covenant. And this new covenant was, in essence, the promise of the Abrahamic promise of Hebrews chapter 6 and the promise of Hebrews chapter 11. The heavenly city, the heavenly country, and the resurrection. You know, William, just today, I've forgotten whether it was Facebook or YouTube, someone said, well, Preston said God didn't promise Abraham dirt. And I'm going, you're not paying attention. Yes, he promised him dirt, but the true promise was the spiritual heaven, the heavenly city, the heavenly country. You know, it gets back to people just trying to find fault. And so I corrected him on that. I was nice, but you know, sometimes you just got to shake your head a little bit and go, if you would just listen to what I said, you wouldn't make that accusation. Or if you make the accusation, you would know that you're just trying to stir trouble. That's all the more you're trying to do, which is sad. I mean, if all you've got to do is to go on somebody else's Facebook or YouTube blog and just try to stir up trouble, you need to get a life. Really, honestly, you need to do that. So, William, here we have the question. Galatians says the Abrahamic promise couldn't come through the law, but they were kept under the law until the time of the inheritance. What inheritance? The Abrahamic covenant
Mhm.
inheritance. So the Abrahamic inheritance would be at the end of the law. According to Hebrews, what were they looking for? They were looking for the Abrahamic inheritance, the heavenly city, the heavenly country. And the writer says, we have here no abiding city. That's the earthly, physical city of Jerusalem. But we look for the one that is about to come. So if this heavenly Jerusalem is in fact the Abrahamic city, then the writer of Hebrews says it was about to come, which kind of begs the question, is it possible that he was speaking about a yet future New Jerusalem at the end of the Christian age or at the end of human history?
That would not work in that context. It just would not. If it was about to come, that meant that it was imminent, that this was something that was about to be realized. And it fulfills the statements Christ made in his ministry that dealt with the time uh, in this generation before some, taste death. And even in the book of Hebrews, he who is coming will come. They could see the day approaching. So all of those passages just demonstrate that this was something that was about to happen in their day and time. And the fact that the old was already being shaken and being removed um, indicates that the time frame for the fulfillment was very, very imminent.
Yeah, and as Hebrews chapter 8, verse 13 says, in that he says, the new covenant he hath made the first old. and that which is old is becoming obsolete and is nigh unto passing away. And William, I know you've heard this argument, but the very first time I heard it 25 years ago,
Mhm.
I had a guy say to me, well, what it means when it says, in that he says a new covenant, what that means is that from the very moment Jeremiah 31 promised the new covenant, the first covenant became obsolete at that very moment and was nigh unto passing for 600 years. Boy, it took a
This
long
doesn't
time
work.
to pass away.
If Christ's death is the basis for the new covenant and the surety of it, how could that be happening
Nigh unto
600 years
passing.
prior to? Yeah.
Yeah, it just, and as I pointed out to this individual just on the spur of the moment when they made that argument, I said, well, okay, then according to your argument, any book of the Old Testament, which becomes part of the Old Covenant system, any book written after Jeremiah was obsolete before it was ever even written
Hmm.
and nigh unto passing away. And they actually said, well, yes. So, in other words, every single prophetic book written after Jeremiah was obsolete before it was ever even jotted down. I said, yeah, argumentum ad desperatum. Okay, we are out of time for this evening. Thank you so much for joining me again, as usual. Folks, thank you for joining us here on Two Guys and a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. With that, I'll say good night and God bless.
Good night.
All righty. Well, that's good.
Okay.
Good show, William. Appreciate it very much.
All righty.
Good night.
Okay. Good night.